The politicization of the Islamic identity means that Islam itself increasingly feels to most of us like a pain in the arse. That's the truth of it. Islam feels annoying, confrontational, supremacist. The politicization of this identity gives it all of those qualities.
There is a deliberate element in the immigration into the West of taking over. The elements of Islamism derive directly from Islam and their own book.
Thank you, Lionel.
As you might understand, I'm going to take some exception to that.
Welcome to the final session of the day of the Spike Summit, Islam, the left and the West. We've saved the least controversial one to the very end, so we go out on a nice, light note, but I hope you can all agree it's a very important discussion that we get to grips with. The prompt for this session was that we noticed, as many people also noticed, that certainly since October the 7th, this kind of unholy marriage, which has been building for some time, was finally consummated between Islamic sectarians as well as leftist, useful idiots, to be frank, who seem to be united both in their hatred of Israel but also contempt for the West more broadly. This really hit home for me when I attended the march against the far right recently, in a journalistic capacity, I should stress. This was the one that was led by Zach Polanski, Hannah Spencer, those gyrating fellas in the bondage gear. You all remember it. But I'll never forget, when I got down to Whitehall, the first block that arrived were waving the flags of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Because that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Waving the flags of a regime which, by any definition, arguably, the most far-right government sitting over a large and proud nation, but have found its place on this supposedly anti-racist, anti-fascist demonstration. So we want to talk about that. How did we get here? What the hell is going on with the left? But also getting into the question of Islamism and whether or not that is what ails Britain at the moment, the way in which it's being enabled by woke leftism. But also the question of Islam itself. Is the growth of Islam in Western society something which is also in and of itself tugging at the threads of Western civilization, or do we need to make those kinds of distinctions? We're going to get into all that and more, and I'm delighted to say we've been joined by an absolutely fantastic panel to do so. I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they will speak. First, join me in welcoming Lionel Shriver. Known to many of you, I'm sure, the best-selling, world-renowned novelist and also absolutely fantastic commentator with a Spectator column and many other outlets. After Lionel, we're going to hear from Fiyaz Mughal. Give Fiyaz a round of applause as well. Fiyaz is the founder and director of Faith Matters and Tell Mum, and it's fantastic to have him here today. And last but not least, join me in welcoming Brendan O'Neill. Brendan, of course, known to many of you, I'm sure, as Spike's longest-running editor, currently our chief political commentator, or chief political writer, I should say, and also the author of many brilliant Spike books, most pertinently for today, I suppose, After the Pogrom, your reflections on October the 7th and what it revealed about the West. So without further ado, Lionel, would you like to make your way up to the podium for us?
I think the current marriage between the left and Islam is the stuff of literature, particular literature. I'm thinking of Evelyn Waugh. It is patently absurd, but at the same time, when you point out the inconsistency of the left embracing an ideology which is anti-woman, very oppressive, opposed to homosexuality. I mean, you know the whole list. And it doesn't bother them. It just doesn't upset them. There are when you say queers for Palestine and start laughing, they don't get the joke. It's clear that what unites these two absolutely antithetical groups is hatred. And I think that's worthy of note because the left is always given, I think, an unearned reputation for being utopian, for being too optimistic. And yet they talk about hate all the time. And you have to look out for, now they're projecting it onto their opponents, but always look out for the words that crop up all the time. I get waves of hatred off of protest groups on the left. They are primarily motivated through negative emotion. And I think it's also worth clarifying because they're often characterized as suffering from self-hatred. They don't feel self-hatred. They hate you. They are driven by despising their compatriots. And the closer those compatriots are to them, the more they are driven to separate themselves. And I think that's one of the things that the progressive mindset is all about, is that if you criticize your own society enough, of which you are a member, including your own race, then you kind of earn yourself out of it. So if you're mean enough about white people, you're an honorary black person or whatever. Whatever you're saying about the group to which you belong, you have just opted out, because it's a kind of protective mechanism. These people are not really self-examining, and they never feel real white guilt. They want you to feel guilty. This is a marriage of convenience, clearly. I don't think that the Islamo left is set to last. I think that they are both glomming onto the other to bulk up their numbers, to improve their electoral chances. Obviously, they have bonded over the whole Palestine thing. The irony being that progressives know absolutely nothing about the Middle East. I think that's really enabled their enthusiasm. The trouble with the left and Islam is that for progressives, Muslims are just another fluffy identity group that they can feel sorry for and protect and regard as victimized, and use as a tool to promote their own virtue. But the trouble is that Islam is not, it's not a race, it's not an ethnicity, it is an ideology. It's not just a religion, it's an ideology. And it's an ideology that doesn't believe in free speech, doesn't really believe in democracy, and definitely doesn't believe in the separation of church and state. And that makes it intrinsically incompatible with our system of government and our values. This is where it gets extremely awkward. Imagine, I'm going to say something controversial. On the right, we are always wanting to make a distinction between having a problem with Islam, the religion, and especially the ideology, and Muslims. So we don't have any problem with Muslims, and we know lots of nice Muslims, right? We always have to make that caveat. And that's true. I know any number of great Muslims, and there are plenty of examples of Muslims who have integrated into Western society great. And that's the caveat. It should go without saying, but it never does, not these days. But let's be honest with ourselves. If you have big problems with an ideology, if you don't believe it, if you in fact think that a lot of its core tenets are in opposition to your own core tenets, doesn't that mean you also have a problem with the people who do believe that ideology? I think our separation between Islam and Muslims is artificial. And that's because religion is not what we call these days an immutable characteristic. So it's not you may be born into it, but you can get out of it. And that makes it very different from the other identity categories that we recognize. And I think this is a point of real difficulty for the right, because the truth is, if you want to keep the presence of Islam muted in your country, then you also want fewer Muslims. And that is just statistically true. And that means we are open to criticism from the left for being Islamophobic. In other words, because there is a huge interlap between the religion of Islam and Muslims as a group, which are treated as an identity group with immutable characteristics, even if they're not, that makes us look prejudiced. We want to discriminate against them. And I think we have to keep making a distinction between a religion and an ethnicity or a race, and to defend our right to say, if you do believe these things, we don't want to invite necessarily millions and millions of you into our country to become resident or citizens because you don't believe in the core beliefs of our country. And this is, it's a real awkward thing in terms of immigration, because I'm sure that both the UK and the US would be very uncomfortable politically and even morally by saying, well, we're not going to let in Muslims anymore. But there are ways of saying, well, we have looked at the statistics, and we have very poor assimilation. We have a lot of welfare dependencies from certain nations which just so happened to be Islamic. But I think we have to be honest about being actively trying to prevent an ever-growing number of people in this country and even in the United States that are going to tend to vote as a bloc, are tending towards sectarian politics, and don't necessarily believe in our entire system of government. And so somehow we have to still be fair-minded and not discriminating in other regards, but I think some discrimination in relation to ideology is fair enough, much as the United States did not want to let in a lot of communists post-war. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lionel. Five, if you don't mind, second voting for.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. I'm following on from a well thought out series of arguments there, and I want to follow on from that. And I'll come on to the issue of migration, which I think is an important one because we are having that huge debate today up and down the country, and it's an important one to have. So as a former Liberal, who used to be a member of the Liberal Party, not anymore, let me just tell you that now, the reality is that debate is needed and that debate has to happen. Let me come back to that. I think this topic is really important because I can see the impact of the alliance between the left and Islamism today in this government. I can see it very clearly. And I've worked with a variety of governments since 2005 when I was called in to give advice after 7/7 on the issue of Islamism with then the Blair government. And I've engaged with governments ever since, but this government won't even engage with me. And I think that says it all, because I'm willing to critique my own religion. Is that why you don't want to engage with me? And I think this is the big problem we have currently with this government. The people advising them give them a view that Muslims are static in their belief. Just what was discussed earlier. That actually Islam is only one way. That actually the Islam of the 7th century or the 14th century is the one that should be practiced in the UK. Well, that's an alien form of Islam to me. That doesn't reflect my upbringing in this country. That doesn't reflect the values of this country that are fused with me, that have come from a Christian tradition, a Roman background, and that make me up, because I can't seem to connect with parts of the Islam in this country as a Muslim. I just can't. It's alien to me. And the reality is, these individuals are advising this government today. So we are in an ideological and political battle today. I put it as clearly as that. We are in an ideological and political battle for the values of our country, and in ensuring, if we're having a conversation about Islam in Britain, that an Islam in Britain is open, that it accepts the values of the country, that it is willing to be critiqued, that it is willing to be pluralistic and outward-looking, that it's willing to make spaces for the gay and other communities and other sections within Islam that are currently even being persecuted within. I know because I've had to work on cases of persecution against Ahmadi Muslims by other Muslims, against LGBTQ Muslims, and against Shia Muslims. So there is a problem of the interpretation and kind of Islam we have in the UK and its engagement with this government. That's my starting point to say. Now, let me go on to say this issue of Islam, Islamism, and the left is not just a problem that started off in the last 5 years or through Zach Polanski. I remember in 2003, I was a young pup, a young councillor in Oxford as a part of the Liberal Democrats. I was against the Iraq War. I thought it was wrong for us to get engaged with it, and I was demonstrating, and I ended up at this very large 1.2, 1.5 million demonstration in Westminster. And let me tell you how long the association between the left and Islamism has been going on for. Because approximately a third, I guesstimate, but approximately a third of the placards at that demonstration came from a group linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. I kid you not. Now, they will say they're not part of the Muslim Brotherhood, but a third of the placards that middle-class white women were holding from Surrey and Sussex on that day were created with the logo of a group that originated ideologically from the Muslim Brotherhood. 2003. So who organized the financing for the placards? Tens of thousands of them. 1.5 million people there? Tens of thousands of placards produced. Who financed them? Who placed them at key conduit points across the demonstration points? Who knew that they could associate with the left and the unions on that day? Who paid for it? Who coordinated it? This has been going on for a long time. This has been going on for a long time, where there is interference in our country. People talk about Russia or China. Well, which Islamist country or financier is interfering with our country over the last 30 years and more? Now, let me tell you the fusion between the left and Islamism. And the fusion is one of the language of human rights. I noticed when I've worked 25 years with British Muslim communities. I noticed about 15 years ago, suddenly they started to change from, it's Islamophobic, how dare you even critique us, to, it's our human right, to, you can't deny us our chance to speak. And another way that this fusion has taken place has been through the language and the hijacking of the language of human rights today. So these kind of groups, Islamist groups and their useful idiots, actually use that language of human rights. And we need to look at this problem. I look at it as two ways, a bit like a solar eclipse. And the issue is, at the core, you will have a group of Islamists, ideologically driven, much like communists, driven every day. They will wait their time. They will wait when they can get into positions in the local authority, or be listened to, or be the representative of, quote, Muslims, or get into central government. There they are, within groups, and other groups which are offshoots given to their daughters. I've seen this in Europe, or their son-in-laws as a diversionary tactic, so you can't work out whether they're part of the core group. Again, we don't know where their financing is coming from. I raised that many times with ministers, even in the Conservative government. They said, let's not go there because some of these countries may be our allies. So you've got a core group of these people influencing, talking the language of human rights, shouting Islamophobia, and in that process, you have the useful idiots around them. And the useful idiots are people in my community who don't know better, who basically get sucked in because the issue of victimization and victimology, the identitarian politics, is running right through their veins. So they get sucked in. Oh, somebody's talking about Islam and defending Muslims. I'll go there. I'll give my time for that. So this problem is about the umbra, the core dark bit of the Islamists, and then the penumbra, the useful idiots. And in that is the left and parts of this government. Parts of this government. A couple of other points. I know, 2 minutes, right, thank you. So we know the convergence of the left also has been, I talk about decades of issues. Convergence, we know, has been around the Palestine debate. Okay, the left and Palestine have been working together around the issue of tackling colonialism, and has been mentioned before. Can you honestly tell me that Islamists or Islamism really cares around power dynamics for women? Really? And the fact is, the first people who actually started campaigning about Palestine, and I was young enough and I went to mosques and I saw this, were individuals who were kicked out of places like North Africa, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, because they were part of the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood. They came in through our asylum policies in the mid-80s. And basically they were active around Palestine. So, I want to end up with saying this. Identitarianism has become part of the issue. The issue that Islam is unmalleable needs to be challenged by us. And I say that as a Muslim. My form of Islam, I always say, needs to change. And my form of Islam is very open. That's what I practice. It's internal. But the form of Islam out there needs to change. And I think it's important for us to be able to critique, but to stand with Muslims when they're attacked, as has been mentioned before, but also to keep holding on to the values of our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Brendan, do you
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. A couple of months ago, I went to the Al-Quds Day gathering in London, just for a laugh. You're always guaranteed a laugh at Al-Quds Day. They're a laugh a minute, these people. And I can tell you now that I have never in my life been in the company of so many tossers. Genuine tossers. And I know this is not profound political analysis, but they were the rudest, most obnoxious people I've met in a very long time. There's a 4-letter word I would use if it wasn't for the fact that Tom and the team have been organizing this esteemed conference for so long. So I won't use it. I'll use it in the pub later on. Horrible people. To be fair, I didn't catch them on a good day because a few days earlier, the Ayatollah had been killed, bless him. In that brilliant anti-fascist airstrike by the IDF. So they were sad. They were grief-stricken. They were upset. And admittedly, I didn't help matters because I was going around to some of the weeping women and saying, cheer up. You know, it's not the end of the world. There'll be another Ayatollah around any time now. And there was. There was. And according to US intelligence, he's a homosexual. So I did try to explain, don't cry. You've got your first ever gay Ayatollah. This is a wonderful moment for Islam. But they wouldn't listen. They were very angry, in fact, when I was saying that. I don't understand why. So I didn't exactly ingratiate myself with them. But even so, even having said that, they were incredibly hostile, and not just to me. There was this bristling atmosphere of hostility. There was anti-Semitism, of course. There was anti-Westernism. There was this snarky, angry, self-pitying atmosphere. This kind of cloying, depthless self-pity, which most of us find really, really annoying. Self-pity is by far the worst emotion you can feel. The young women were the worst, by far. They all had their veil on. They kept snitching on me to the men every time I said something out of order. It really brought to mind Orwell's 1984, where we're told that the young women were the most bigoted adherents to the party. Orwell says they were the swallowers of slogans and the nosers out of unorthodoxy. And those women that day certainly nosed out my unorthodoxy. And eventually, I was snitched on so many times by these young women that the young men came over to deal with me, and they essentially pushed me out of this gathering. They kind of physically pushed me out. The police had to escort me away onto a Lime bike and then wave me off to make sure I was safe. And I was grateful that the police escorted me away. But then another part of me thought, hold on, are the Metropolitan Police conspiring with these Islamist freaks to remove the bloke who dared to take the piss out of the Ayatollah? And that is indeed what happened that day. It was an unholy alliance of woke policing and Islamist intolerance, and I was the victim of it. But of course, my job is not just to moan about people who gather on the streets of London. It's to think analytically, why are people like this? What has happened? And it struck me that day that these people, these angry, self-pitying, this mob of people who couldn't bear my jokes about the Ayatollah, it struck me that they are the end product of British society's suicidal indulgence of Islam. And that display of such arrogant certitude on their part, such rigid dogmatism, that is what happens when we tell people their religion is perfect. When we tell them it is so perfect that it is bigotry to criticize it. When we tell them it is so perfect that it is a punishable offense to criticize it. You might lose your job, you might even lose your head. That has literally happened in Europe. Our indulgence of the nonsense idea that Islam is beyond criticism, is beyond the moral reproach of us plebs, that is what has given young Muslims in Britain a license to behave in a staggeringly unfree, unjust, and un-British way. My question today that I would like everyone to think about, because I don't have the answer to it, my question is, how do we revoke that license? How do we remove that license? How do we make it clear to these people that you absolutely cannot behave in this way in our free, open, democratic society? And I think my Al-Quds day out, it was a day out, it was quite good fun, if I'm being brutally honest. My Al-Quds day out brought home to me that the true problem we have in this country right now is not Islamophobia, it's Islamophilia. That's the problem we have. British society has recklessly given a green light to the sanctification of the Muslim identity and the demonization of anti-Islam sentiment. We end up with an Islamic version of what our Christian forebears suffered in the 14th century, which is these gangs of arrogant religious pricks going around telling people what they can think and what they can say and shoving blasphemers like me off the streets. And of course, there's much worse. All I had to do was get on a Lime bike and then I was back to civilization. But there is much worse than that. There is violent behavior as well. There have been bombings and beheadings and mass stabbings, all motored by that cloying combination of self-regard and self-pity that allows politicized Muslims to treat their critics as demons. This is why I increasingly have a problem with people who try to draw a neat, clear distinction between Islam and Islamism. I have a real issue with that. The problem is Islamism, people will say. Even people whose heart is in the right place and who may well be on our side on lots of discussions, they'll say Islamism is the problem, leave Islam alone. I'm not convinced. I think that the Islam that most Brits encounter every day is, functionally speaking, Islamism. That's what people encounter. The politicization of the Islamic identity means that Islam itself increasingly feels to most of us like a pain in the arse. That's the truth of it. Islam feels annoying, confrontational, supremacist. The politicization of this identity gives it all of those qualities. To see real Islam, you've got to go to a mosque and sit next to some old geezer from Pakistan who just wants to spend his retirement worshipping Allah. I have no problem whatsoever with people like that. But what we see on a day-by-day basis is, functionally speaking, Islamism. When you see women with their faces covered in the fashion of medieval society, when you see those annoying spectacles of mass public praying and gangs in Whitechapel trying to silence Christian preachers, and Islamic youths saying, fuck Israel, fuck the Jews, victory to Hamas. When working class Brits say that this is incompatible with British society, they are right. When they say Islam is incompatible with British society, that is what they are talking about. That narcissistic culture of performative piety and religious intolerance and just a staggering indifference to the concerns and beliefs of the majority of British society. Let's be clear, when a third-generation British Muslim woman or girl covers her face with a black sackcloth, she is saying, fuck you to Britain. She is insulting the good people of this country. She is saying that our men are so rapacious and our women are such sluts that it falls to her to show us the right, righteous way. That's what's being said. And that feels to people like Islamism, and it's what Islam has become in this country as a consequence of the reckless politicization of that identity. Just to finish, I'll come back to this later, there are a number of things we can do to address this. I think there are some short-term things we can do and long-term things. Short-term, I think we should ban the covering of faces in public areas. You should not be allowed to do that. We should ban mass public praying. I know that will catch all sorts of religious groups. That's life. Mosques that openly celebrated 7th of October, they should be investigated and shut down. We have freedom of religion in this country, but it stops the minute you celebrate the murder of Jewish people. Then it's revoked. And then more long-term, we need to re-establish the virtues of our society. We need to become more assertive. We need more people like me, not to blow my own trumpet, who will go to Al-Quds Day and say to these people, you are really fucking annoying and you need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brendan. We're going to go out to audience questions shortly, but before we do that, I thought we'd have a bit of discussion up on the panel just to tease out some of these differences and distinctions here. So, Lionel, to start with you, what do you make of the point that Fiyaz was making here about how there is a form of Islam that could be cultivated within a country like Britain which wouldn't pose precisely the problems that you have been talking about in your opening remarks?
Well, yes, there is, I think. But in order to cultivate the kind of Islam that he's talking about, you have to keep the numbers down. I think if you look at the comparison between the Muslim community, and there almost isn't one in most places, in the United States and in the UK, they're completely different stories. There's only about 1 to 2%. I think it used to be 1. I think it's creeping towards 2% of the population is Muslim. For the most part in the US, they are spread out with some unfortunate exceptions. And they're very well assimilated, and there are lots of apostates, right? Many Muslim Americans have quietly dropped religion. They don't necessarily make a big deal out of it, but it's just not that important to them. They're not those people who say, well, it's more important to be Muslim than American. They are real Americans. But this has worked because you don't have huge concentrations of people with the same religion who came very recently from a country where the form of that religion is quite primitive and quite fundamentalist. And that's toxic, and we've seen that here. And so the key is to keep the numbers down. And then you can, Muslims in the United States make more than white people in terms of their income. And they're not a problem. In fact, I would say the only real problem in the US is that the Muslim population is starting to climb very quickly, and Americans are naive about the nature of Islam.
Absolutely. And Fiyaz, to bring you back in here, you were talking precisely about that question about a kind of form of Islam which is compatible with Britain. How does one do that, particularly when people will fairly point out Quranic scripture, things in the Hadith, things that would indicate that this would be a tremendous problem? And also because of the fact that whether you like it or not, whether we like it or not, there seems to be an awful lot of Muslims within British society who are precisely not following the kind of open faith that you've been talking about.
Totally right. Look, this is a really difficult quandary, and I find myself in this because I am in the very tiny minority right now. And I'll just be frank about that. Look, yesterday, I love the British Museum. As a kid, I've always had a connection to it. And they were running a Sufi event. Let me just give you this example. And there's a room on Sufism that was there. And my family are Sufi background. And in a way, as I was looking at the material and the literature, it was all about personal spirituality and being the best human being you can within the context of Islam. And most of the people that came to the UK from Pakistan actually had a Sufi traditional background. The problem is that Islamists in the 80s totally and utterly took the leadership and inculcated a lot of these ideas that came in. So let me come back to your question. Is this going to take time? Heck yes. Does it mean we need to manage migration? Absolutely. You need to do multiple things here. Does it mean we need to get these people out of government and government associations. Yes, but as long as Labour are in power, I can't see how that's going to change. So this is a decades-long issue we're dealing with here. And I am an outlier. Because actually, I wasn't brought up with Islam and being Muslim as my primary identity. I wasn't. And I was born in Uganda. I'm a Ugandan Asian. So the reality is also there are, from different perspectives of the globe, as has been said earlier, they bring their baggage with them. I grew up as a minority. I've never felt that I have to wear my being a Muslim on my sleeve. So it's a long, decade-long issue, but we need to manage other issues, migration and other concerns, and critique those bastards that say Islam is only this way.
Thank you very much. And Brendan, just finally before we go out to the audience, you talk about the need for people to step up, to be brave, but when you're talking about something like blasphemy, like Quran burnings, is it not become a hell of a lot to ask of ordinary people to push back against many of these regressive medieval trends which have been sort of inflicted on our society when the costs are so high? Batley Grammar, Wakefield, what happened to Hamid Joskin who burnt that Quran outside the Turkish consulate? Isn't it, you know, there's being brave and there's being brave, I suppose, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's very true, but, you know, safety in numbers. So maybe we should all have brought a Quran today to burn it. And I'm being a little bit facetious, but not entirely, because you're absolutely right, Tom, that there are severe consequences for blaspheming against Islam, and that's the problem. That's the problem we face, and we need to find a way around that. And I agree that some of the forms of Islam that are coming into our country via mass immigration and so on are backward, kind of desert forms of Islam, the kind of religion none of us would ever follow because it's crazy. But that's not the whole problem. What I'm increasingly interested in is the interplay between our own cowardly, messed up society and these forms of Islam that are coming to this country. And that's the toxic combination, because not only do we have, we absolutely do need to get a handle on mass immigration, and we need to curb what's going on at our borders, but also the larger problem, and I really agree it's a decades-long issue, is that as a society, we are bowing down to the idea that it is blasphemous and wrong and possibly even criminal to criticize Islam. And I can't overstate how much that emboldens not only the extremists, but also ordinary Muslims. Because when my parents came to this country in 1970, if someone had said to them, your rural Roman Catholicism from Ireland is the most perfect thing ever, no one can ever criticize it, they would have been arseholes as well. But in fact, what happened is they came here and everyone said, oh God, another bunch of Catholics from the west of Ireland having 100 children. People took the piss out of them. And there is a real quality to that. I'm being serious. One of the reasons I encourage anti-Islam blasphemy is not only because it's freedom of speech, because it's our right in a society that has fought very hard for the right to blaspheme, but also because it is the only means of bringing equality to our Muslim communities. They need to learn that being an equal citizen in Britain means you have the same rights as everyone else, and they have the same right to take the piss out of you. And until our Muslim communities realize that, we are going to have this problem. So we need more anti-Islam blasphemy for the benefit of non-Muslims and Muslims.
Thank you very much, Brendan. So we're going to go out to audience questions here. Where are my microphones? We've got one here, one here. Great. So do you want to take that one to this gentleman who's got his hand up there? Who wants to speak on this side? Yeah, this gentleman in the patterned shirt there. Yeah, just give it to him, but you first.
Thank you so much. My name is Amir. I was born in Iran, and I've been having the Islam debate for maybe over 20 years. And listening to Lionel, listening to Brendan, this was maybe the first time I felt I can take a breath of fresh air, because what you've said is precisely the conversation that is not being had. I'm sorry, Fiyaz, I don't mean any disrespect to you, but the thing is that we've started with these made-up terms, and they were used today as well with Islamism, and it wasn't said today, but jihadism. These aren't real words. These are just a way to protect ourselves by saying, okay, we don't mean all the Muslims, we just mean this section. But fact of the matter is that everywhere you go, and we have 55 countries that are examples of it, Islam, the religion of Islam, is a cancer. And every time this spreads in any velocity, we see the end results. And it's coming here, it came to my country of birth, it's coming to Sweden where I grew up, and I think the last question I have is to Lionel. You said, well, one way to solve it is to minimize migration. But it's too late in the UK because migration has already happened. So what's the solution here, or what's the remedy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So whoever's got the mic over here. Who else wants to speak on this side? Yeah, there's a gentleman over there, and then I will come up to the back, but yes, go.
Hi, really interesting so far. I pretty much agree with what Brendan O'Neill is saying, but not 100%. My concern is that these third generation Muslim girls that are veiling up, okay, some of them by the time they're 18, they might be all, happy to be militantly Muslim, shall we say, but they get instructed to veil up much, much younger, as early as, I don't know, I mean, I've seen in my community, in my neighborhood, 10, 11-year-old girls, and the danger is that these are amongst the weakest people in our society. So, to me, it's very easy to get carried away. The problem, quite rightly identified by yourself, sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Fiyaz.
A very small minority of Muslims, mainly men, creating the problem. But the danger is, especially in this current mood in society, that the response might end up really, really harming the weakest in our society.
Yeah.
Really have no voice.
Thank you very much. So while this gentleman speaks, do you want to take that microphone way up to the back? There's a woman in pink who's very sensibly sat herself next to the air conditioner who has been wanting to speak. But yes, over here.
So as we saw that Mohammed Fahir Ahmaz got 3 years and 6 months for beating up police officers in Manchester, and we've talked about Lucy Connolly, but we also know that a gentleman got 3.5 years for throwing a police cone at officers. So we know about two-tier, and I really thought it was brilliant what Brendan was saying about Islamophilia. It's difficult to type because there's not automatic recognition of that word when you make a post. But I think that I've been arguing with many people in the public about why we need to, and today at the conference, reassert our virtues and our values of the Enlightenment, of freedom of speech, of democracy, of toleration and religious toleration, and that we don't have a turn to authoritarianism just because in our despair that we haven't won and we may not change the institutions and it may take too long and it's gone too far. And I'm seeing people say it, whether it's the death penalty or other, just in this instance, the benevolent state that will ban just this one thing. And I'm surprised to hear you say, Brendan, that we need to now ban the burqa in public. Do you mean just in working spaces or do you mean for everyone? And I would advocate that we need to really champion our virtues and values about how we are free, and those who want to assault it and attack it have to integrate, and we have to deal with them with authority, our authority. But our authority comes from our way of life and our values and our virtues and convincing one another of doing it. And I'm concerned about that turn and also how it will impact everyone else. It's not toleration, it's not part of the Enlightenment in my view.
Thank you very much. Who else wants to speak up on this side? If you want to take the microphone just up to that gentleman in the vest over there, and yes, you go ahead. Sorry, right up on the left there. Your turn.
Hi.
Yeah, go.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to invite everybody to please go on the social media and look up at our fight, as well as Stop the Hate and the Lion Guard of the UK. Because these are three organizations that go out to the street and counter-protest all the hate marches that the government will not put a stop to. We stand there and we take abuse from the keffiyeh-wearing coverings, Halloween costumes, and we stand up and we end up all our rallies playing the British anthem to uphold British values. So I invite you all to please go and look up at these organizations and join us in our next counter-protest. So just be a mensch.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and whoever's got the mic here, then we're going to come back, but we will come back out again. But yes, go for it.
We've had 20 years of intellectual debates about radical Islam, fundamentalist Islam, and it's led to campaigns that are government funded that focus on diversity and tolerance and British values and prevent many terrorists who have been successful in this country were previously flagged by Prevent and were able to nevertheless go on and carry out acts of terrorism. What do you think about the more radical proposals by some politicians that the intellectual debates, we've had it, it's failed? One thing that may, in their words, save this nation is for mass deportations, because the uncomfortable fact is that overwhelmingly with the terror attacks, the suspects as well as the communities they come from, the one nexus is immigration.
Thank you very much. We will come back out, but to bring it back to our panel here, Fiyaz, feel free to respond to anything you heard. Not all of it, because we've got limited time. But do you want to start with the gentleman's point down here, which is saying that whilst with all the best intentions in the world, you're fighting a losing game because of all of the examples that you cited?
Well, let me just say that, look, our nation has been through severe, turbulent times over thousands of years, and we've still got through things. So this is not an existential moment. It is a time where we have some real difficulties. It'll take time, but these will pass. I talked about decades. It'll take decades, but they will pass. So I keep some hope in that prospect. But let me say the second thing here. Absolutely, this is about managing migration. Absolutely, fundamentally that. But it is also about holding on to our core value system. And our core value system is the rule of law. Our core value system is critique. So I'm asking you here is critique. I have no problem. Go critique Islam as much as you want. Actually, as Brendan said, it helps me because I want to see it change in its interpretation in the United Kingdom. And where I believe the Quran is not the literal word of God because it was written 100 or 50 to 100 years afterwards, and we all know human beings make mistakes, I want you to be able to critique it. And I want us to be able to challenge those who say this is the way Islam is. Because ultimately, I have seen some parts of my community go outside cinemas and intimidate people just to have films shown up and down the country. This is not on. So I go back to our values are sacrosanct. Assert them, talk about them, critique Islam, talk about things about why we need to have this as this existential, practical, as well as ideological battle. One last thing, if I can add.
No, please.
One last thing. Somebody said, and I understand I can't understand, because a lot of Iranians' pain has gone on for 50 plus years. I can't understand, because it's a pain I've never been through. But I do take exception to say that the knee-jerk reaction is Islam is a cancer. Because in the end, you've got 4 million Muslims. Where is that going to take you? For people like me, if you lose people like me in that process, this is a clash, and it's a head-on clash. And the other factor is, historically, Islam has been open in its history at points, and it's been very closed at other points. Like other faiths, it has had difficult, persecutory, and also deeply problematic parts of its history. You know, Islam was not spread through kindness at some points in its history, okay? So the reality is, over the last 200 years, a brutal and brittle form of the interpretation of Islam with the politicization, and here Brendan is absolutely right. What we're seeing today is the tentacles of Islamism right across parts of our society, because my form of Islam is exactly what Brendan said. If you find somebody in a mosque talking to God in his own way, internally praying, who's got a problem with that? That's me. I do that. I sit there and say, God, can you help me out today? I'm having a difficult time. I don't cause any commotion to people. We need to protect the space for that. Otherwise, actually, where's that going to take us? So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you very much, Byron. Lionel, anything that you want to pick up on there from the questions? We had the questions about mass deportations, the question of the status of women in particular, and also whether or not we're sort of betraying our values by going down a more authoritarian path. Anything that...
I think it's worth addressing. We have let all these people in, so it's all very well to talk about limiting migration, but the mistakes have already been made. I think the very first thing we can do is at least not make everything worse. So I don't think that tightening up on immigration is irrelevant, but we do have to deal with the fact that we have a massive foreign-born population and then a growing second and third generation population of Muslims. I think the majority population has to become far more assertive. For one thing, I think we need to deliberately blaspheme. If we do not go and blaspheme, we will de facto be disallowed from doing so. In my tiny little gesture, you know, I have a column in The Spectator, and I always give my columns, when I file them, a headline. They don't have to use it, but a couple of years ago, I titled one of them, "Mohammed Has a Poopy Face." It was a political gesture. It was a challenge. You can't publish that, can you? And of course they didn't and couldn't. And it was a tiny little demonstration of how constrained we are. You know, we didn't have any publications in the UK that ran those Mohammed cartoons, did we?
Spike did.
Spike did?
Yeah.
Oh, I knew there was a reason I was here.
In the wake of... Sorry about that.
But I mean, even in order to successfully blaspheme on this tiny individual level, you have to have a government that has your back. I mean, after all, with this famous Quran damaging incident by the Turk, I don't remember his name, but
Hamid Choskan.
right, and who gets the other kind of book thrown at him, the guy who tried to stab him. So, I mean, the cops are not into our blaspheming, and in fact, the cops are little honorary Muslims, essentially, or Islamists. And so what we need is a change of leadership. In this country, it has to be a revolution.
Thank you, Lionel. And Brendan, as ever, pick up on anything you want, but maybe starting with the point about the burqa and whether there's a recourse to authoritarianism here along those lines.
Yeah, well, firstly, I really agree with Lionel's point that we need more blasphemy. This country that we are all in right now, called England, is built on the right to blaspheme. Modern England is built on the struggle for the right to blaspheme. And there's a really good reason for that. It's because tyranny, power, once took the form of a very unforgiving form of Christianity. And in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, for a very long time, English people, our forebears, well, not mine, I'm a Mick, but our forebears fought for the right to blaspheme in order to expand their own liberty, to expand the liberty of society, and to keep power in its place. That's exactly what we need to do with Islam. Exactly what we need to do. In relation to whether I'm being too authoritarian, I think in my old age, I'm becoming a little bit more authoritarian. I was on a bus the other day, and everyone was playing music out loud, and I thought, I will vote for any political party that makes it illegal to play music out loud on your phone. Stop it. But more importantly than that, freedom of religion is really important, but freedom of religion is not an absolute. It never has been. Right back to John Locke and his Letter on Toleration, which is basically the founding document of freedom of religion in this country, written in the 1600s. He says freedom of religion is great, but it's not absolute. So, for example, if your religion says you must sacrifice children, fantastic. You can believe that shit if you want, but you're not allowed to do it in this country. And I think we can expand that to other ideas. I think if we want to have a free, open, democratic society where you can see people and communicate with people and judge people, you should not be allowed to cover your face in public. I don't care if that interferes with people's freedom of religion. Our freedom to see our fellow citizens is more important. So I'm happy to say that. Also with mosques, numerous mosques in London celebrated the 7th of October pogrom. Some imams actually gave speeches in which they cited sections of the Quran calling for the burning down of Jewish people's homes. Lucy Connolly was sent to jail for a social media post in which she said we should burn down a migrant hotel. Why were those imams not sent to jail for saying we should burn down Jewish people's homes? It's a disgusting double standard. And it springs from Islamophilia. Your freedom of religion stops when you are inciting violence against Jews. The final point I would make is that a real turning point for me was not the 7th of October 2023, but the 8th of October 2023, because it's on that day that on the streets of London and Berlin and New York and Sydney, we saw mobs of people, Islamists, leftists, rich twats, university people, all these kafir mobs celebrating the murder of Jews. It was as repugnant as if people had poured onto the streets to celebrate Kristallnacht. In fact, it was worse. More people were killed on 7th of October than in Kristallnacht. So that has to be our wake-up call. This is deadly serious. Our own native-born Britons, as well as second and third generation Muslim Britons, are celebrating the rape and murder of Jews. If that doesn't wake us up to the seriousness of the problems we face, nothing will.
Thank you, Brendan. So let's go back out. Who wants to speak? I imagine a fair few of you. So yes, let's take the woman's question just over there. Meanwhile, yeah, if you want to get the microphone to her. Where's my other microphone person? I can't see you. There we go. If you would like to, whilst she's speaking, there's a gentleman here, glasses, bald head, you can't miss him. Just there, perfect, yeah.
Brendan, I disagree with you. I disagree with you because at the moment I don't think the argument has been... We're getting to the point where it's possible to start having debates that take the last 30 years to account. It feels like that discussion is just happening. And the reason why I disagree with you is because it feels like it's jumping the gun and it feels like it will be an own goal. And the reason why I think I'm saying that is because in Nottingham, where I'm from, there is a current discussion which is being slightly provocative that's happening in the press, which is Nottingham is going to ban masks in town. there's a discussion that follows on, which is, should you ban everything, including the burqa? My response initially is, where has the public discussion happened with teachers and parents to set the example and demand that their children start acting in a way that is civilized? So it feels to me like I understand that we're living in something that is moments of peril and real danger, but I just think we're potentially having own goals by jumping the gun when we're just at the moment where some of those persuasive arguments could be put through the emerging politics that's happening at the moment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you over here. Meanwhile, who wants to speak on this side? Yeah, do you want to take the microphone to the woman in the middle there, just while you're making your point? Go.
Thanks for the description as well, Tom. Nice. So I live in a kind of, possibly not unique spot, but I live in a part of Birmingham called Moseley, and I live on a road where if I turn right, I go down, get to a road called Ladypool Road, which people may have some knowledge of because it used to be part of the Balti Triangle, where the Balti first came into being in this country. And when I first came to Birmingham 35 years ago, it was a very kind of integrated multicultural area where people came from around the Midlands and further to dine in these areas. It is now, I would say, 95% Islamic. If I go for a little walk, I only see burqa'd and niqabbed mothers taking their children to school. Interestingly, if I take a left and I walk for 2 or 3 minutes, I arrive in the most progressive part of Birmingham, in inverted commas, where we've just elected 2 Liberal Democrats councillors. We have Labour MPs. We've probably got the possibility of Green candidates in the future. And I would actually say that the problem lies to the left, literally, because I think it's the progressive middle classes, and I would include myself amongst those for many years, who I think have created the problem by not pushing back and by allowing things to develop.
Perfect, good point, well made. So while she's asking her question, who wants to speak up the back here? I can see there's a bloke really going for it, waving his hand over there. Let's pass the mic up to him. Yes.
So the postmodern left are very good at using language in order to frame the discussion. What would you say to the idea of, instead of talking about moderate Muslims versus extremist Islamists, to talk about moderate Muslims versus literal Islam?
Thank you very much. So, and while we're waiting for this person to speak, who wants to speak on this side? Who hasn't? But actually, let's go right down to the very front. Yes, go.
Hello, this is a comment for, I think his name is Fiyaz. You seem like quite a nice guy, but it sounds to me, I'm sorry to say, that you are whitewashing Islam, and you are a useful, maybe not idiot, but you were speaking about useful idiots, so you're a useful person for extremist Islam. I just want to explain a little bit why, but because I'm a Jewish man, and I'm a gay man, I'm also an atheist. And if I were to go to Israel, the only Jewish country, all those things would be fine. Also, in Jewish law, there's no way to become un-Jewish. Even the most ultra-Orthodox people, the custom is that if you're Jewish, you can't stop that. So there's a tradition that has evolved over millennia in the religion of Judaism of adapting and reinterpreting and dialogue and changing the religion over time. And that same can be said for Christianity, but it can't be said of Islam. Islam means submission. Muhammad was the perfect man. You have to do as he did, and the Quran is the word of God. And if I was a person such as yourself who had a very, very personal interpretation, I wouldn't stand up on stage in front of an audience like this and speak on behalf of Islam.
Thank you very much. And yes, down here, and then we'll come back.
A note of caution, which is that the message that Islam is Islamism, and that they are one and the same, is the message and the strategy of the Muslim Brotherhood themselves. And this is the problem, is that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists want their fellow Muslims to believe that their political ideology is the same as the religion. And their whole game plan is to convince us of that also, because then that gives them the authenticity of religious Islam. So, sorry, can you hear?
We haven't cut your mic off, don't worry.
So this is a really counterproductive message, I believe. If we want to stand against Islamism, we need to challenge it politically, and we need to make clear the separation. That doesn't mean that we have to big up Islam. Islam is obviously a religion with many, many flaws, and we should, as Brendan says, blaspheme away 24/7. But by confusing the two things, we are going to drive the 2 million Muslims that don't believe that Sharia should be mandatory. We're going to drive those moderate Muslims into the arms of the Islamists, because what the Islamists are saying is Western democracy doesn't like Islam.
Yeah.
Western democracy is not compatible with Islam. Western democracy is against you, brothers. Come over to our side. So this is counterproductive. And if we look at France, what they've banned the hijab, it's not working there.
Thank you very much. We are going to come back out. I can see you all. So we're going to have a quick response from the panel, come back out again, and then get people to sum up. But Brendan, would you like to start maybe with this point down here?
Yeah, I just think we are missing a trick when we say there's Islam over here and there's Islamism over here. I understand the impulse behind that, because I don't want to see Muslims in this country demonized. I don't want to see people like on our panel, anyone else demonized if they're just worshipping their God and then doing their jobs and living in their society. Completely agree. But we're missing a trick, because the issue we have, and someone may raise the problem of moderate Islam, it's a real misnomer at the moment. Because of the politicization of the Islamic identity, because of the cult of victimhood, because all minority groups are openly incited by the idiot middle classes to conceive of themselves as victims and put upon, etc., etc., we have a form of Islam that is functionally speaking Islamism. It is and I'm talking about Islam, I'm not talking about Muslim Brotherhood, I'm not talking about open supporters of Hamas, I'm talking about what people might think of as moderate Muslims. Increasingly, that includes people who are anti-West, who are anti-Britain, in the same way that other young people are as well, who have this hostility towards the values of our society. This is the problem with the politicization of the Muslim identity. We've created this third layer, which I think is the most problematic layer, which is not really Islam, it's not really Islamism, but it's something incredibly dangerous and incredibly influential, and we see it on our streets every single weekend with ordinary Muslims who have jobs and who are relatively well integrated, who are on the streets saying the Jewish state should be destroyed and saying Hamas is an army of resistance. This is a serious problem, and I think we're missing a trick with this. In relation to whether it's an own goal to ban certain things, I mean, the thing is, what I'm essentially arguing for is more freedom. Fundamentally, like Lionel, I want the freedom to blaspheme. That's what I want. I want the freedom to blaspheme. Not for a laugh, although it can be a bit of a laugh, not to be childish, but because it is a fundamental liberty of our society to say your ideas are bullshit, they're dangerous, they're destructive, and I'm going to call them out, or to make jokes about them, or to show the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, whatever else it is. That is such an important freedom. So I'm defending freedom. As part of living in a free society, you should have high expectations of everyone in that society to behave and present themselves in a particular way. When you go into the public realm, you should show people who you are. You should have respect for your fellow citizens. You should show them your face. You should not go around thinking that every male in this society is such a rapacious threat that I have to cover myself from head to toe, because that is an act of bad faith. That is an act of institutionalized misandry. It gets people's backs up. It makes them pissed off. It makes them feel less free because they think they are under suspicion by these people. So that's what I'm talking about. If we are serious about a free society, we should have high expectations of everyone in the society to approach everyone else fairly, openly, and in a just fashion. And at the moment, this middle ground between Islam and Islamism is not doing that.
Thank you, Brendan. Lionel, anything you want to come back on?
I dislike the term Islamism because it's a confection of the progressive left. It is not an invention of Muslims themselves, and it's a lexical means of saying that, okay, there's the problems with the terrorism and the intolerance and everything, but that's completely separate from Islam. It's just over here. It's a tiny little camp of unpleasant people. And then there's all of Islam and all the other Muslims, and they're lovely. And they have nothing to do with each other, but there is a relationship. I mean, you have to take people at their word, what they believe. It's in the book. It's written down. It's been translated. And this is a however many times you repeat Islam is a religion of peace, it isn't. It is a religion of conquest. And my biggest concern about, shall we say, the high participation rate politically in this country, and increasingly in the US, particularly in New York, where I live part of the year, is that as far as the locals are concerned, the native population, this is great. This is just multiculturalism, and especially in New York, we've elected Mondami, and isn't that forgiving of us, not hanging on to 9/11? And then, of course, over in London, we've got Sadiq Khan, who, as far as I can tell, is never going to be out of office for demographic reasons. Okay, we think that makes us look good. You know, we're not prejudiced. But what does the larger Muslim community think internationally? I think it looks like they think they're winning. That there is a doctrinal commitment in Islam, not Islamism, but Islam, to take over the world, not to put too fine a point on it. They expressly aim for a worldwide Islamic government, and everyone's Muslim. So this is not a live and let live creed, and therefore there is a deliberate element in the immigration into the West of taking over. And I know that a lot of people are very uncomfortable with that, even using the word invasion in US politics in relation to immigration makes people hysterical. But there is an element here of territory taking. And it is conscious, and we shouldn't be naive about it. And the elements of Islamism derive directly from Islam and their own book.
Thank you, Lionel. Fiyaz, do you want to come back on anything that you've heard of this?
Yeah. As you might understand, I'm going to take some exception to that. But let me come back to the issue of somebody mentioned that I could be a useful idiot. And precisely, let me tell you this, go and read my articles. I'm probably the leading challenging voice to the regressive elements in my faith today. I also, let me just tell you something else. I also speak up when I need to speak up, because I was at the Nova Festival, and I've been to Israel many times. I've interviewed Nova Festival survivors, and I was disgusted to hear that actually no Muslim turned up at the Nova exhibition to speak. It was just me. So I hope that puts paid to your argument that I'm some kind of useful idiot there. Let me just say that first of all. That's just one example. But let me tell the second thing. I think Brendan's arguments are extremely strong, because Brendan has hit the nail on the head. there is this third way that is going on in this country. That's the point I'm making here. That's the point I'm making. It's not pure Islamism, and it is an Islamic interpretation, but it's mixed with politicization. He's got it. There's a third way that's developed in this country that's become a cancer. It wants to kill Jews, and with that, it wants to kill Muslims like me. Be in no doubt about it, critical, deeply challenging Muslims like me are next on the list. And so he's hit the nail on the head, and in a way that puts paid to the view that there is some kind of worldwide Islamic takeover. Let me give you an example why that doesn't really wash. I was in Dubai about 6 months ago, and I hear up and down the country other Muslims saying to me, "What the hell are you doing giving space to these people in Britain today?" How is that a worldwide Islamic takeover when people of my faith are telling me, "You guys are too soft on these scumbags"? How is that an Islamic takeover? It's no Islamic takeover. People in Saudi Arabia are telling me that. People in Egypt are telling me that we're too soft. So actually there is a part of the Muslim world that's had enough of them. Because not only are they born and brought up and fed in this country, they export their murderous ideas to the Middle East and then kill people there. So they know the impact of this kind of ideology. Let me just say a few other things. The issue is, and I also want to add the issue about Islamism as a term. It's not a Western term. Islamism was used 50 to 60 years ago within the Egyptian context. And in Egypt, the term in the Middle East, Islamism, is a term. They know. They get it. And I've only realized that when I've started to engage with those kind of countries. So the fact is, there is an issue, but the third way that is happening in this country is where the vortex of our country and our institutions are getting sucked into. And Brendan is absolutely right that the way to do this is to challenge, is to blaspheme and hold the space, is to be able to say some of your ideas need me to proactively challenge them. And last but not least, let me also say this, that this battle is being lost. I'm one of the few that are left speaking because others are not speaking. But if we do not go into the challenge phase at this late moment, then this government and its institutions will effectively allow us to go back 20 to 30 years. And I think that's where I fear for the future of this country.
Thank you, Fiyaz. Right, we're going to come back out for questions. We're fast running out of time, so it can be a point or a question. It just has to be quick, essentially. So who wants to speak on this side? There were some hands in the middle there. Trying to see. Right, we've got 1, 2 here. So yeah, do you want to hand the microphone over there? Meanwhile, whoever's got it on this side, bring it down to the lady in the second row here. Perfect. Yeah, go.
Firstly, Fiyaz, obviously we've worked together and I greatly respect your work, although I do understand the concerns that have been said about whitewashing, and I can understand why it feels quite insulting to many British people when, wouldn't it be great if every Muslim in Britain was like you? And we even saw the example of the Oxford Union recently where the president had invited Tommy Robinson to speak, her herself being a Palestinian, and she'd also come under fire for previous private WhatsApps about Hamas being exposed. And then at the debate, Jonathan Sachidoti wrote how Lawrence Fox held up that brown envelope and said that inside was a picture of the Prophet Muhammad. And the same president stood up and jumped to her feet and said something like, "Have I not done enough for freedom of speech by inviting Tommy Robinson here as a Muslim woman to speak?" And they explain it as sort of the limit of free speech when it comes to Islam. But the issue is that it's not just about, for example, the 2 million Muslims who don't want to enforce Sharia law. I think that's quite a low bar for not wanting to enforce Sharia law. But in 2006, one poll said that 68% of Muslims in Britain think that it should be a criminal offence to prosecute Islam. And that's 2006. So even the most liberal Muslims, for example, like the president of the Oxford Union, still thinks there should be a limit on how far people can blaspheme. So what do we do even about the liberal Muslims?
Point well made. Who else? Who wants to speak up the back? Because I've been neglecting you. Anyone up there? Any hands? Yeah, do you want to take it to that row there? And whilst you ask your question, just over there. Sorry, that way. Yes, go.
It's me now?
Yes.
Okay, so very quickly, I know Posey Parker today had I've got two things to say. Posey Parker had a demonstration today about Free Your Face. And when she did this campaign about women not wearing the niqab or the things, she's had hundreds and thousands of women writing to her about the hell it is living in a shroud. So I just want to say that, and I know there was an action today. And also, I've just been handed something by someone who doesn't want to be identified. She's a teacher, works in secondary education in school, forced to lie and whitewash Islam on a daily basis in school. The textbook that kids are learning are filled with lies. They are official and approved textbooks. The whole education on this point is completely failing. Teacher unions are woke and extremely left-wing. I had an encounter and they sent me a link to their anti-racist policy. I knew then that I have no protection from the teachers' union. My question is, who will sue the textbook writers? Who will challenge the unions?
Thank you very much. Do you want to pass the microphone back here? Anyone want to speak on this side who's been missing? Do you want to take, yeah, just in the middle there, and yeah, we'll go top.
There is only one religion that is slaughtering people of different faiths globally around the world, and that's Islam. Ergo, I do think we need to rethink our freedom of religion. Nearly 50% of mosques in Britain are Deobandi Islam, which is the same Islam that is practiced by the Taliban, and it was created in Pakistan as a resistant movement to us, the British.
Thank you very much. Right, who else wants to speak? Do you want to just bring the microphone to this gentleman down the front? We're going to take, who's got the microphone on this side? Him, and then we're going to come back. Yep. So, yeah, just there.
Sorry, just taking from the chap from Birmingham over there, yes, there might be problems with Islam, but for me, the real... Sorry? Oh, closer. The real problem are the stupid white liberals, the twats, as you call them. With the non-existent inquiry into the rape gangs, I want every single social worker, I want them named. I don't want them having pensions. I want every single police officer who arrested a man when his daughter was being raped inside. I want them named. I want them. That's the problem. And that, I don't know how we're going to deal with that because it is so entrenched, but that's the real problem for me.
Thank you very much. And just finally,
the Muslim Brotherhood has been banned in all Western countries and most of the Middle East. It hasn't been prescribed in this country, although Starmer did the token action of prescribing Palestine action. Was that right or was that wrong?
thank you very much. So we're going to bring it back to the panel now for their closing statements. I'm going to give you 2 minutes each. So you don't have to respond to actually everything you've heard or anything that you've heard, in fact, but if you just want to leave them with your final thought, that'd be fantastic. Lionel, what would you like to leave us with here?
There was one thing I meant to add on a practical level. It's going to be hard to change in this country, but apropos of the previous panel with Ms. Barbal Singh, the best thing we could do is to stop state funding of religious schools. I mean, it would upset a lot of Catholics, but someone should tell them that most of their students are secretly not practicing Catholics anyway. And it would be worth it. I lived for 12 years in Northern Ireland, and one of the things that most helped perpetuate the troubles in that province was separate schooling. And so they grew up completely apart. They never had friends from the other community, and the state funded both separate systems. it's deadly, and it perpetuates in this country, a complete lack of assimilation. It also perpetuates discrimination against girls.
Thank you very much, Lionel. Fiyaz, your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, let me just kind of answer your question. I think it was a question over there first. Should the Muslim Brotherhood be banned? Yes, but let me tell you how weak our successive governments have been, and this is part of the problem. Even when Michael Gove wanted to name and shame organizations, civil servants and the legal processes meant he couldn't even do that. So this is how ineffectual and disabled we have become in government processes. I would rather people and groups are named and shamed out there, and that our government and statutory institutions have the robustness to do that. And yes, the Muslim Brotherhood, with named individuals and organizations, should be banned. Let me just finish up by saying, as we all know now, I hope now, there is a substantive problem. We know that substantive problem is the politicization of Islam, which is permeating and perpetuating its tentacles across many places. The fact of the matter is, I'm not going to give you any easy solutions. This is going to be a 40, maybe to 80-year issue. I'm going to tell you as it is. So this is a long-term issue. The thing you can do is to critique. The thing you can do is to challenge. The thing you can do is to hold the space for the protection of the individual and individual rights. And maybe support those individuals from Muslim communities who are willing to challenge. That's something that can help. And I leave you on this last element. This is not something that is going to existentially crack our country, but it will cost lives. Sadly, depressingly, as we have seen. It doesn't mean we stop talking. It doesn't mean we have fear. It means we need to regroup and keep going.
Thank you very much. Brendan.
Yeah, as a product of a state-funded Catholic school, I get the final word. I really agree with the point about twats. I love to talk about all these twats. The point I made in my opening comments is that the real issue we face today, look, we can talk about Islam until the cows come home. I'm sure there is loads of bad things about it, maybe some good things, I don't know. The problem is the suicidal indulgence of Islam by our cowardly institutions. That is the problem. And where has that led us? Where has that kind of supine bowing down to Islam, this idea that you should never criticize it, you should never mock it, it must be ring-fenced from ordinary, stupid Britons. Where has that led us? That gave us the rape gangs. Girls were raped because of our society's indulgence of Islam. It gave us the West Midlands police banning Jews from Israel from going to an Aston Villa game last year. I think people underestimate how serious that was, because that was a police force in Britain doing the bidding of an anti-Semitic mob. There's a word for that. That word is fascism. When the police do the bidding of anti-Semitic mobs, you cross the line from the craziness we had been in previously towards a state form of fascism. That is incredibly serious. And then the final point I want to make about freedom and veils and burqas and so on, I increasingly see girls veiled. I'm talking about 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and in fact, Ofcom raised the problem of girls being veiled, and it was shut down for being Islamophobic. And Ofcom made the point that no girl under the age of 13 or 14 should be veiled. I see girls veiled now quite frequently. Ask yourself, why did the bomber of the Manchester Arena in 2017 think that girls at a pop concert were a legitimate target? And I'll give you the answer. A society that permits the veiling of girls as if they are sinful creatures is a society that will greenlight the murder of girls for being sinful. That's what we have to stop right now.
Thank you, Brendan. And thank you all of you for coming today. Give yourselves a round of applause, and we'll see you at the pub. Thank you very much.